Greetings, welcome, and thank you for joining us. We are here today to discuss 3 new resources being published by the Murad Code Project. The Murad Code Project is a global consultative initiative that aims to build a better community of practice with, for, and concerning survivors of systematic and conflict-related sexual violence, or SCRSV. Now, this project centers around the Murad Code, a global code of conduct that captures the minimum standards that everyone who gathers and uses information about SCRC must uphold. The code addresses documenters, investigators, journalists, researchers, policymakers, human rights monitors, humanitarian workers, and many other actors. So it's great to see so many people from across these sectors joining us today. The Murad Code Project was established in response to the frustrations that survivors have shared for many years about the harm they experience when they participate in unethical and ineffective interactions with people gathering their information. Now, no matter how well-intentioned they may be, when people doing this work do not follow the minimum standards, they cause or even further amplify harm to survivors. The resources being launched today were developed by the Institute for International Criminal Investigations, which is currently spearheading the Murad Code Project in partnership with survivors and 7 survivor support organizations. These organizations are Nadia's Initiative in Iraq, the Refugee Law Project in Uganda, Him Rights and the Story Kitchen in Nepal, the Mukwege Foundation, SEMA in Ukraine, Colombia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Medica Zenica in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Lawyers and Doctors for Human Rights in Syria. This phase of the project is being supported by the Government of Canada's Global Affairs Canada. We hope that many of you will have already taken a look at the resources, which were shared via email before today's event. We will also post the resources in the chat. In a moment, I will introduce our first speaker to you to tell you more. But before I do so, I would like to acknowledge that the issues we will discuss today may trigger difficult emotions for some. So please look after yourself and step away from the session if you need to. Relatedly, when we open the floor to Q&A later, we ask everyone to be respectful and considerate of others in the virtual room. Now, turning to the event itself, I will introduce our first speaker, Aaron Gallagher. Aaron Gallagher has 25 years of experience conducting investigations into international crimes. She's currently an investigation team leader at the IIIM Syria Mechanism and has previously worked for the International Criminal Court, the ICC, and the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the ICTY, that is, and as a sexual and gender-based violence, SGBV expert for the UN Commission of Inquiry on Syria and Libya. Aaron led the consultations to develop, in our own words, the Survivor Perspectives resource, working with survivors from all over the world to understand their experiences of documentation and other information gathering processes. I will now hand over to Aaron to share more about the significance of this resource, why and how it was developed, and some of the key messages it contains. Aaron, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Priya. As Priya mentioned, I'd like to give you a little bit of background to this resource and how it was created before turning the floor over to Tatiana, Jaya, Alexander, and Marian. As Priya mentioned, we have seen systematic and conflict-related sexual violence receive more attention, media coverage, research, and investigations conducted. But what came with that was additional attention, was more people engaging with survivors who did not always have the training, the skills, sensitivity, or even understanding of such crimes and survivors involved. So the Murad Code project came out of a need to improve the ways that documenters, all of us, the broad definition of documenters, engage with survivors. And a natural starting place for the Murad Code was to speak to survivors themselves. It's not very often that as documenters that we get to go back and speak with survivors we've engaged with or interviewed and ask them, how was your experience with us? The Survivor's Perspective resource, In Our Own Words, was that opportunity. In Our Own Words is a compilation of survivors' perspectives, their insights, and their messages for all of us practitioners of how we can do our work more effectively, more ethically, and more sensitively, and ultimately better assist and support survivors. It informed the Murad Code project as a whole, and it also accompanies it as a standalone resource, which is the booklet that you received online as part of this event. I had the privilege to speak with 58 men and women from 9 different countries and conflicts and from diverse backgrounds. We tried to get a cross-section of survivors and the types of documenters that they engaged with. These men and women volunteered to speak with me about their experiences when they spoke to documenters. And that methodology is detailed in the resource, so I won't go into too much detail about it, but you can learn about it there. And in my conversations with survivors, I asked basic open questions such as, why did you choose to speak to someone? How did you feel before speaking? What were your concerns, if any? What was that experience like for you when you spoke with a documenter? What helped you open up and tell your story? What silenced you or shut you down? What would you like documenters to know before they engage with a survivor? And how can documenters help empower survivors more? And we recognize that survivors had both positive and negative experiences when they disclosed their accounts, their stories. There is no monolithic survivor experience. We tried to capture as many messages as we could, and we also heard some common themes that emerged from these conversations. Unfortunately, not every survivor is quoted. I wish we would love to have captured everybody's messages, but please know everyone's words and messages shaped this resource and the entire Murad Code project as a whole. I'll briefly mention some of these common themes and messages that shined through. I won't mention all of them. They are in the resource.
स्रोत सामग्रीमा सम्पूर्ण प्रभावितहरूको उदाहरणहरू अथवा कथाहरू समेट्नु.
I believe someone has their mic unmuted. Could it please be muted? Thank you.
So some of the common themes that we did hear were survivors speak to us for a variety of reasons, not always for the reasons we assume and we think. As one survivor mentioned, I needed this disclosure to reduce the burden of my memory. This was a Syrian survivor. And yes, some do because they want justice or bring attention to crimes, but sometimes survivors also don't think they had a choice. They didn't think it was an option not to speak to us. So something to keep in mind. Another important theme that shined through was the importance of confidentiality and privacy when we engage with survivors. There were survivors who expressed fear for their own safety and their families. That fear was about perpetrators who still ran free in the community, other times about stigma and how they would be treated by the community if people knew. That made it crucial for how documenters approach survivors, where and how they conducted interviews, and how they treated their information and their identities. Another important message was about informed consent and the need for control of their own stories. To quote Sonia from Nepal, "I was always scared about my own story. I didn't know what a documenter would do with it." Many survivors told their accounts to numerous documenters, journalists, and others, and they were not always told or informed who they were speaking to. And they have messaged that they need to know who they're speaking to, who the organization is, what is the purpose of the engagement, what does it mean to speak to a documenter, and the rights that they have, that they don't have to answer questions, they don't have to conduct the interview, or they can end it at any time. They need to be fully informed about the consequences of speaking to us documenters before they consent to speak to us. As I mentioned, some survivors had positive experiences too in speaking to documenters, and it was always insightful to hear the responses to the question, what helps you open up to us? Frequently, it was advice of do not pressure us, listen, be patient, don't be looking at your watch. And to quote Alyssa from Ukraine, the documenter should allow the survivor to take the lead. Let her tell her story as she needs to tell it. She might say something that is not important to the documenter, but she needs to say it for herself because it's important to her. Documenters sometimes try to guide too much. They can help her, but not tell her what path to choose. Another key message was about stigma and shame. It was a common concern and barrier for both men and women in speaking up. This goes back to confidentiality and importance of informed consent. And there can be serious consequences for exposing survivors, and it is our job as documenters to protect survivors. To quote Joel from Colombia, speaking up as a man brings consequences like stigmatization. One of the greatest issues is a silent enemy that we all carry with us as men. How will they see me if I speak up? It's difficult for us to acknowledge that we experience such a painful event. The last message I will mention to you is the need for trust. Trust with documenters and trust with the entire team who a survivor might engage with, such as interpreters, security officers, protection officers, photographers, etc. This trust is essential. This includes treating survivors with respect, with dignity and compassion. That's part of building trust, and providing full, honest information. To quote a Bosnian survivor, it's impossible to build trust during the first contact. It takes time. Provide a feeling of safety and security. Survivors need to be assured that they will not be misused or left alone, and unconditional support and unconditionally support them in the process. In her own words, is not a guideline, it's not a protocol, but the direct, unedited words from survivors themselves. I promise you, whether you're new to documentation or seasoned, in her own words, will forever change your perspective. Excuse me. an approach to how we do this work.
Thank you very much, Erin, for explaining to us the careful process that was followed in developing this significant resource, and also for setting out some of the key messages. Now, let's now turn to our second speaker, Tatiana Mukanire. Tatiana Mukanire is a Congolese human rights activist, founding member of SEMA, the Global Network of Survivors to End Wartime Sexual Violence, and national coordinator of a survivor network in the DRC. She's also the author of Beyond Our Tears, in which she shares her testimony of victims of sexual violence and their experiences of the war. Tatiana is one of the survivors who contributed to In Our Own Words. Tatiana, the floor is yours, and you have 8 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Good morning, good afternoon, all. My name is Tatiana. I come from the Eastern DRC, a region where violence is a daily reality, a region where for over 30 years, conflict continues, and the millions, thousands of survivors who are waiting for reconstruction. And if I'm before you today, it's because my own journey, it's about what I have experienced and what I've witnessed. And this has taught me a painful truth. A poorly conducted interview can break a person as much as the violence that they have suffered. I have seen survivors return to square one. I have seen women and men already wounded become victims again simply because we did not respect their words, their pace, their dignity. So a question arises, are survivors required to participate in interviews or discussions? The answer is complex. Yes, sometimes they wish to do it, but if the security conditions, the conditions of respect are not met, it's a problem. Because in our societies where insecurity reigns, talking can cost you your life. Because, like I often say, the survivors no longer want to give information because confidentiality is not respected. And because our words, if poorly protected, can become a weapon against us. I wish to share with you a personal experience. In 2019, I was invited in a major interview. I was prepared. I was told that it was important. I went to Bukavu while a friend was supposed to give her testimony in Paris. I didn't know that this interview would become one of the most traumatic moments of my life. I was pushed to the limit. They wanted to see my vulnerability. They wanted to expose it to the public as if my pain had to become a show. And I really broke down. And today, this memory haunts me. But what really struck me is what happened to my friend who was supposed to give her testimony in Paris. She was supposed to speak for the first time. She arrived at the studio and there was, she was very courageous. And when she felt that it was not right, she said no. The person in front of her responded, "Why did you waste our time? Why did you have to waste our time?" And it's at this point that she was broken. When she returned to the hotel, she hugged me tightly and said, "Tati, never again." We cried for hours. I eventually managed to turn things around. Unfortunately, she has sunk, and I still pray today that she can find her way back to healing. What we experienced is not an isolated case. Too often, the people we are talking to come to us with arrogance, as if we have no value. Too often, we are asked to give testimony several times without anything being kept, without any follow-up. Often we are used as data sources and not as human beings with rights, limits, and expectation. A survivor from Syria said it very aptly. Most of the experiences that ultimately became problematic were related to lack of trust and exploitation. Human rights organizations often take advantage of detainees. They say they need to hear from us, then they leave and never return. They receive aid and don't share it with us. So allow me to be very clear. Before any interview, the survivor must know, why are we talking to him or her? What will be the purpose of his or her story? In what format will the story be published? How will his or her private life be protected? And what will be the consequences for her? She needs to know all that. As Mina from Nepal says, survivors need to know how and for what purpose the person in charge of documentation will use their stories. If published, what will they publish? How will they guarantee respect for our privacy? What will happen to us after we tell our story? And what will be the repercussions for us? What are our rights? If you cannot explain this clearly, you are not ready to conduct an interview. If you cannot guarantee confidentiality, you put the survivors in danger, at risk. If you cannot offer a genuine choice, if you are not taking a survivor-taking approach, you should not do it. And if you cannot provide follow-up, you need to say it honestly from the beginning. Don't create false expectations, because behind every testimony, there's a life. Behind every silence, there's a story. And behind every survivor, there is dignity that must be protected. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, for sharing your personal experience with us, for highlighting the profound impact documenters have, whether leaving survivors feeling re-traumatized and powerless, or conversely, that it is in their power to help survivors feel truly seen and heard. Thank you for that. We now turn to Jaya Luintel. Jaya Luintel is a Nepali journalist, women's rights activist, and founder of the Story Kitchen, an organization that works with women survivors of Nepalese armed conflict to support them in healing and truth-seeking processes. The Story Kitchen is one of the 6 organizations that worked with the Murad Code Project to facilitate survivors to share their perspectives during the consultations to develop in our own words. Jaya will reflect on what many of the survivors emphasized, that documenters must come prepared with the right knowledge, mindset, and approach before conducting interviews. For those of you who were not present during the introduction, a reminder that unfortunately, we do not have Nepali interpretation today due to a technical issue. However, efforts will be made for that to be provided when the recording of the event is made available in a few days. My apologies for that. Jaya, the floor is yours. You have 8 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Priya. Namaste and good afternoon. Thank you for joining the launch of the Survivors Perspective resource within Murad Code. This moment belongs to survivors for your courage, strength, and your continued demand for dignity, justice, and peace. And today I speak with humility and deep gratitude to all of you. I have been part of the Murad Code and SPR work since 2022, and we started it with Erin. Erin had already spoken about this process as well. The Story Kitchen has worked with survivors of conflict-related sexual violence in Nepal for many years, creating safer spaces for survivors to meet, support one another, and pursue justice collectively. From that grounded work, IICI reached out and our partnership began. IICI partnered with Human Rights in Nepal as well, another organization for this process. Since the beginning, I have listened to survivors and supported this process. In these consultations, survivors were not participants, they were experts. I will never forget the moment survivors were asked what they want from documenters, what feels safe, what feels harmful, and what respect looks like. The power actually shifted when we were having these consultations. Survivors were guiding the documentation, how the documentation should be done. And that shift in this process really matters. Survivors were holding the power and they were exercising their agency, and they were kind of teaching the documenters how you should do it properly. Today, I want to focus on three things at the heart of this resource. First is contextual knowledge. When we sit with a survivor, we are not meeting a case, and these are the things survivors have shared. We are meeting a person living within a family, community, and culture, and often within a system of stigma. And without the context, even with good intentions, can cause harm. Sonia, a survivor from Nepal, said, I need to build trust, and that takes time. The one who listens to us, it is a mere story, but for us, it is what we have gone through. It is hard, especially for unmarried women. We experience stigma, depression, and abandonment from family and society. This is actually both what Sonia says here. This is both a warning and a guide. What sounds like a story to the listener can carry heavy consequences for the survivor. Trust cannot be rushed. This is what SPR talks about. If we do not have time to build trust, we do not have the right to ask for the truth. This is what SPR talks about, and this is what survivors have said and shared during this process. And the second one is preparation. And sometimes during the documentation process, people think that the documenters think that preparation is all logistic. But what survivors are saying that it is all about ethics, preparation. It means being transparent about the purpose, what you collect, who will access it, how it will be stored and used, and what risks may follow. So consent is real and not only for the purpose in checking the box or buried in forms, and it should not be rushed, the consent process. And it also means showing up with support, not just questions, referral options, aftercare, and a plan if someone becomes overwhelmed, in this process. So it is really important to have that preparation. And what survivors have said during this consultation process is documenters should prepare, actually do your own work, understand trauma, stigma, and power, because harm can happen quietly when you put pressure on us, when you become impatient, and when you disbelieve us. And if you push for details that serve the system, not us as survivors, that actually harms us. These are the things survivors have shared, and this has been reflected in the SPR. Third one, survivors have talked highly about is respect. Nofa Ghanim Joma, a Yazidi survivor from Sinjar, Iraq, she said that one sign of respect is when I first sit down and I am told that I have full freedom to say what I want or not say. That freedom Nufa talked about is to speak or not to speak, to pause, to stop, to leave is respect. And it also shows in how we act as documenters, treating survivors as equals, not rushing, keeping promises, and being clear about what happens with what is shared. And when context, preparation, and respect, actually, when these three come together, trust becomes possible. As one Colombian survivor victim said, trust brings about trust. If we want trust, the process must be trustworthy. This resource actually sets the standard for that. So today, thank you. Thank you to survivors in Nepal and to survivors across the world from DRC, Uganda, Iraq, who have joined today, and many others who shared your expertise to make the next person safer from your own experience. And thank you to IICI for creating real space for survivor leadership, and to the Story Kitchen team for holding the space that brought Nepali survivors' voice and expertise to the international advocacy. And I will end with a commitment and a request. I will keep building survivor-led spaces for justice in Nepal along with my team, where survivors can speak and also choose not to speak as well. And to everyone who documents, please do not just quote this resource. Practice it, slow down, learn the context, prepare well, and offer real choice for the survivors. And also show respect from the first minute, because survivors actually notice all our body language even before we speak. And no deadline is more important than someone's safety. So to survivors, thank you for leading and shifting the power. Thank you so much. Namaste.
Thank
Over to you.
you. Thank you so much, Jaya, for sharing with us what survivors emphasize, the importance of documenters coming prepared, the right knowledge, the right mindset, and as you've emphasized, the significance of respect as a fundamental principle in interactions with survivors. Thank you, Jaya, and thank you, Tatiana and Erin, for introducing us to this important resource. You can also explore the interactive microsite version of it, where you can hear as well as read some of the quotes shared by the survivors. So please do try and make some time to do that. And I will now hand over to our next speaker for today, Marian Volkmann Brandl. She has more than 15 years of experience in human rights, criminal investigations, and transitional justice, mainly in West and Central Africa, and is the deputy co-lead of the Murad Code project. Since joining the team, Marion has collaborated with survivors and other experts around the world to develop tools and awareness-raising materials that inform survivors of their rights as captured in the Murad Code. She's here today to tell us about one of these tools, that is the Murad Code Rights Tool for survivors. Marion, you have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Priya. Alors, un instant. Thank you, Priya. I'm glad to be able to introduce the Murad Code Rights to Survivor. I'm going to try to share my screen so that you can see how it looks like. I think, yes. So as we have just heard from previous speakers, why it is so important for those of us who document or gather information about systematic and conflict-related sexual violence to uphold the minimum standard that apply to our work, and what the consequences are when we don't. I'm sure many of you joined today because you already commit to these ethical standards. But the truth is, there are many people who are gathering information about survivors who either don't know about the principle distilled in the Murad Code, or even if they do know them, they don't know how to apply them. They think they lack the resources, the time, or the capacity to do so. And in this situation, the survivor cannot rely on the person who is interviewing her or him to keep them safe. And so while we were developing the resource just presented, the one in our own words, survivors told us that they don't always know how to check if an interviewer will respect their rights, as Tatiana was telling us so eloquently. And they were asking if our project could try to help them get a guide that is for survivors to help them navigate the process. This tool was developed in close consultation with a group of survivor experts, and you will hear from a member of this group in a moment. The goal was to create something that captures the Murad Code principles, but in simple, plain, straightforward language to ensure that the messages could be understood by survivors in any context and when they're interacting with any kind of interviewer. The result is a tool that gives clear information to survivors about what they can expect and what question they should ask before they decide if they do the interview or not. It contains illustration, as you see here, and it's divided into 3 stages. So what to remember before you agree to an interview. And importantly, again, as Tatiana was saying, the fact that in most of the time, in cases, you can't say no, that you can take your time to decide. And once you've agreed, if you agree to do an interview, that safety and confidentiality comes first, that you can say what you want to say in your own words, and that after the interview, you can ask to review what has been written or published about you, and that you are informed about how your information is being used. The tool has been translated in 7 languages, in Arabic, Bosnian, French, Nepalese, Spanish, Swahili, and Ukrainian. And it's available on our website, online, so it can be printed as a booklet. I encourage you to have a look at it and consider how you can use it in your work. If you work directly with survivors, please share it with them. So this will help them to truly make informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. We'll now turn to Alexandra Maximenko. Alexandra is the spokesperson for Alumni, a network of Ukrainian men who survived captivity and torture. He is also a member of Synergy for Justice's survivor expert roster. Alexandra participated in consultations to develop the rights tool for survivors and is here to share his perspective on why such a tool is needed and how it can help survivors to prepare for interviews and ensure their rights are respected during these interactions. Alexander, please go ahead. The floor is yours. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you. Dear organizers and colleagues, I participated in developing this guide and I'm proud of it. My name is Alexander Maximenko. I'm from Kherson, South Ukrainian city. In my peaceful life, I was just another grandpa, father. I was an activist. I worked in a very respected state establishment. But in February of 2022, enemy came to my hometown. Occupants started torturing and killing people. Myself, a civilian man, was forcefully deprived of freedom and I was put into biggest torture chamber in Kherson. Civilian prisoners were really cruelly tortured by electricity. They were deprived of sleep, of food. Their bones were broken, and they experienced CRSV, and a whole complex of actions which were aimed on breaking man's spirit. I was lucky enough to be freed and to leave occupation, but freedom made me face new challenges. My health deteriorated. I had no money, no documents. To be able to renew my social status and be able to receive even a pretty small state compensation of 2,000 euro, I needed to receive a status of former prisoner. Here in Ukraine, we have a special interagency committee, and I got rejected. I was able to receive this status only after repeated appeal in 2 years. And it's not a single story, unfortunately. Tens and hundreds of survivors have to apply to this committee for a few times, and they got rejected in a very intolerant way, which contributes to re-traumatization. And to protect our rights, we created a network of men called alumni. We created our own system of rehabilitation. We are working on raising awareness on rights of survivors. Our voices represent voices of thousands of survivors who are now in captivity. And now about the most important. From the very first years, during investigations with police officers, when communicating with social workers, medical workers, journalists, lawyers, we could see and we could feel, unfortunately, those so-called back practices. We, on the other side, were not aware of our rights. We could not oppose and protect our rights, and our interviewers were not prepared to talk to us. Police officers could be interrogating us in a big room with some strangers using language which contributed to repeated traumatization. Medical experts, they were examining survivors in rooms with barred windows, which reminded survivors of torture chambers they were kept in. So nobody really cared about triggering moments, and there are dozens of such examples. And additionally, representatives of law enforcement bodies, they were not aware of CRSV issues at all. So in the majority of materials of criminal proceedings, such data is absent as such, and as a result, consequences of CRSV was not documented at all. Or survivors started hiding them because they were traumatized during interview. Additionally, mentality of our post-Soviet society leads to stigmatizing CRSV issue. But as we know, occupants were using CRSV against men as psychological weapon, and it was happening in around 80% of cases. And in the state, we don't have statistics, because the statistics which is provided by Office of General Prosecutor does not correspond to reality. And this is the result of stigmatization I mentioned earlier. Additionally, men do not really believe that work of law enforcement agencies are effective. They are traumatized by communicating with them, and they just hide from society. And only starting from 2022, thanks to active support of international human rights organizations, CRSV gets proper attention in Ukraine. Laws are being developed, specialists are receiving trainings. Me personally, as expert, participated in trainings for investigators of national police, of judges, medical experts, social workers, and journalists. Them all, by the way, were really interested in communicating with us survivors, and not once we were receiving very powerful feedback from them. From the very beginning of our activities, we faced total absence of any training materials. We had only our personal experience. A bit later, we received access to Murad Code. Team of Murad Code project developed this guide, this tool. It's very powerful, and it's really needed, not only to survivors, but to all the organizations who interact anyhow with survivors. All the participants of the process should be aware of this tool, especially now when the whole groups of survivors are being released. And I believe that we have a lot of work ahead of us on implementing this tool. It won't reach everybody. You have to take it to all the people. And every survivor should receive the access to the guide, to this tool, to know their rights. And every person who interacts with survivors should receive proper knowledge. So I believe that we have a lot of work ahead of us, and this can be a topic for a next big project. And also, I want to devote my speech to those men who died because of torture and captivity. Just the day before yesterday, one of our members left us. He was just 50 years old, but the experience he went through in captivity, those torture and post-traumatic experience he had, caused his heart to fail. He could live and live, but he passed away. And this happens every year. We are losing 1, 2 our colleague. And by the way, what we do, if our people, colleagues, had this knowledge at the moment they were released from captivity, we could have saved some of them. So it's also a matter of life, not death. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alexandra, for sharing with us these difficult personal experiences, the importance of the network alumni in supporting survivors, and also the challenges, the many challenges faced by survivors. Thank you. I will now hand back to Marian Volkmann-Brandau, who will discuss a resource that the Murad Code project will publish in the coming weeks. Over the past few months, Marian has been conducting interviews and research to develop a briefing note that compiles evidence of the different forms of harm that are caused to survivors when information gatherers do not uphold the minimum standards distilled in the Murad Code. Over to Marian to tell you more, and a kind reminder, Marian, just to be mindful of the time as we are nearing the Q&A portion of our event as well. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Priya. I'm going to speak in French. Our research was to respond to an important question: what are the prejudices caused when the minimum standards are not upheld during interviews, even if the intention is good? As Irene said it at the beginning of this seminar, as people who document, sometimes we do not have the occasion to interact with survivors after the interviews. There are spaces secure spaces where we can talk about suffering, we can talk about anguish that they had after an interview. As Murad Code, we would like to put this in a document in order for those who document and use this information, they should have it in terms of nuisance. And so this research used the literature as well as interviews with survivors and professionals. And I looked at the process as a whole, not only what's happened during the interview, but also the way the interview is carried out, how it is shared, published, presented, and reused. So what we know is has no appeal, as Tatiana said it, Alexander, and the others. Prejudice are there. They are not theoretical. They are not limited to one sector. They are caused by defiling processes, research, justice, and even sometimes in the world of humanitarian work. So in order to try to simplify this, we classified these prejudices into 5 categories. The first one, the most evident, is physical prejudice and security risks. When confidentiality is not respected, the risks could become physical and immediate. The survivors talked about reprisal after revelation of their identity, and sometimes there are some details which could help people reveal their identities. There are threats, and sometimes they have to move from their localities, which means that violation of confidentiality is not just lack of upholding morality. It can have direct risks for survivors and even their families. The second prejudice, or maybe the second type of prejudice that we identified, is psychological and emotional prejudice, including re-traumatization. Tatiana talked about it in a very eloquent manner earlier on, and others have talked about anguish, flashback, panic, distress, which come in time. And sometimes when the interviews are pressed for time, sometimes they carry these interviews without paying particular attention to some of these issues. And sometimes they have repeated this story a few times, even if this is done under the Murad Code principles. It is always something that can, which can give anguish. Now, once the interview is over, the third type of prejudice that we identified is re-victimization by justice, by the system, the justice system. The note documents prejudice that is caused specifically by institutional treatment, credibility, humiliating interrogations, or insensitive lack of protection, ambience. For example, in the hearing rooms where victims can be re-traumatized again, they can be treated as culpable. And we also documented cases of attempted suicide after toxic interviews. There are also some very bad examples from this note from international tribunals, national justice system, and we also note the European Human Rights case court, which recognized that this traumatization can be a violation of human rights, and there can be sexist interviews in various European countries. The fourth is re-stigmatization and long-term repercussions. This can be amplified by the way information is collected, presented, or maybe shared out there, which means that sometimes survivors can reject any interaction with institutions, even institutions which could give them some support. So it denies them support. The note also talks about the narratives which give a lot of details. Tatiana talked about it in a very clear manner. Beyond the fact that it is uselessly re-traumatizing in a court when we give a lot of information, later these details could be used to point out people. We can talk about incoherence, and maybe we can try to criminalize these victims. And this can also have an impact, a long-term impact on their lives. During my research, I talked to a woman who was raped during a conflict, and she told this story to the mother, and reading an article on her family, she could see her story there, and this changed the course of her life. What can we do? We can start by doing what we are doing today, by listening to survivors, men and women, and we can take their testimony seriously in order to ensure that this gives them dignity. We can read the resources that we are publishing today. It is called In Our Own Words, and we can do it very many times as a check-in before talking to survivors. We can read and reread the Murad Code, and we can consider it as the best practice for our daily work. And before anything, before entering into contact with a survivor, we have to be honest with ourselves, and we have to ask a question: is this interview really necessary? And my objective, can it be attained without this interview? If it is necessary, we have to commit ourselves to use practices which are centered on survivors, survivor-centered practices, and this is the resource that we have come up with survivors, including experts such as Alexander, and this is essential, and we have to share this resource with survivors. Thus, we have to go beyond this approach of not doing harm. We have to be actively involved in promoting the rights and dignity of survivors, and this is in each and every step of collecting and sharing information. And this is why the resources that we are sharing today are going to allow us to do it. The point of view of survivors, we have to remind them of their rights, but we also have to consider the prejudices that we can subject them to. And the three approaches in one debate, it is our responsibility to do better together, all of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marion, and to all our speakers for their presentations today. I will now open the floor to questions from the audience. As a reminder, please could you raise your hand if you have a question, and we will invite you to come off mute. Just to kick off the discussion, we've already received a question from Kelly Easton, and perhaps it's a question for Erin Gallagher. Kelly says that I was a legal intern at an international criminal tribunal with which Synergy for Justice worked. I seem to be having difficulty accessing the question. Let's see. Yes. While discretion prevents me from going into detail, what I saw about the court's treatment of survivors didn't seem to follow the Murad Code, and the court didn't seem to prioritize the Victims' Participation Office. How do survivors' rights nonprofits engage with international criminal tribunals, particularly when the tribunal is not as collaborative as hoped? So I'll direct that question to you, Erin, and then open the floor for other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. I'll do my best with this question. I think it's one where it has to be attacked collectively from all different angles. You need leadership to take it seriously, policymakers, funders, to hold all of sections, units, staff accountable. Nobody has a monopoly on doing this work well or poorly, as I've found out. So yes, that's all the more reason we need something like the Murad Code. Also with survivors knowing their rights more and being able to exercise them, and also educate others. And one thing I remember, it was the Refugee Law Project had said that everybody in their organization receives training, sensitivity training on working with survivors, from the cleaners to the administrative staff to counselors to everybody. And I think that's a good approach. I know harder for a large tribunal or court, but that should also be the attitude. I think we're all going to have to hold courts, tribunals accountable, whether it's advocacy, articles, letters to the president's, pressure, etc. It can be shame as well, but it from the outside and the inside, to expose perhaps what is lacking, and advocate on behalf of survivors. I know not an easy response and answer, but I'll leave it with that.
Thank you, Erin. And now I will turn to questions from the participants who are going to ask their questions orally. And I see several hands up. Let me start with Edwidge Bryn. If he could be unmuted, please, so that Edwidge could ask his question. And I will then follow with the subsequent individuals who've raised their hands. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Marion, Gabriel, because I have had the possibility of working with the Murad Code in Cote d'Ivoire. I have sensitized people about it, and I am part of this panel. So first of all, I'd like to congratulate the leadership and the resilience of the survivors, especially Tatiana, who talked about her experiences. I think that she is very dynamic and very strong. I think the question goes to Madame Shaya from Historic China, who said that survivors, I don't know if I had it, she talked about the single survivors who are abandoned. So I'd like to talk about this issue, the experiences that they have had, or maybe I'm going to explain myself. There are women who feel that they were abandoned by their husbands after some torture or some cases of rape, and these women who are single, and they are single now while they were married before, the experiences. And now Alexander, who talked about a network that he created and which is made up of men. I'd like to know, why did you choose, why are you only having men? Because in Cote d'Ivoire, we have both women and men, because men who have agreed to work with us are very, very motivated by various reasons. But survivors of conflict-related issues are mostly women. I'd like to know why you are only working with the network of men alone. Thank you.
Priya, you are on mute.
Thank you for that question. Alexander, would you like to answer?
Yes, thank you. That is actually an interesting question, because Ukrainian experience, unfortunately, is very different from all other experiences. And there was a necessity for men to unite, because, as I already mentioned, Russian soldiers, they use Series V against men who are in captivity, I mean civilians, as psychological weapon to break their spirit of resistance. It happens so on the territory of our post-Soviet society that attitude to CRSV against men, it's very tabooed. And it's very stigmatized as well. So men, they react more acute, and unfortunately they are broken after CRSV more often. And to help each other, only men can help each other. Men don't want to open up to women. They just get more reserved. They hide from society. We love our women, you know. We cooperate with female organizations such as SEMA Ukraine, for example. I'm really happy that myself and Tatiana, we have the same space to talk. We have a coalition between male and female organizations. We support each other, but men can help more effectively to men. And that's why we raise this issue in our society, that this has to be separate. Has I answered your question? If there are any other follow-up questions, I'm open to discussing.
Thank you, Alexandra, for answering the question from the perspective of the Ukrainian experience. I am going to move on to the next question. I see that you've got a thumbs up, so I'm going to move on to the next question from Mogi. Please unmute Mogi so the question can be asked. Please go ahead.
Yes, Happy New Year, everyone. I am Rose Muheko, a survivor from DRC. I stay in Uganda. My question is, okay, it's not a question, it's something like an addition. We survivors, up to now, we remain vulnerable. Now my question is, up to now, up to when? Because we still lack protection and justice. And where can we access justice? And where the protection? Because it comes when we ask ourselves, because in French we used to say, vaut mieux souffrir que mourir. Now it has changed. It is better to die than to suffer. Being a survivor, it has been really, even our children are growing, finding ourselves in the same situation, no change at all. Up to when? The other thing, it's the children born out of sexual violence. It's a big problem up to now. Children are growing, but there are some really who do not even have experience their childhood phases, no education, no parental guidance, nothing at all. These children are suffering. So they are asking themselves, these children, they belong to who? Men are no longer protecting the family. Men are failing. Men are running away. So really, women are just there crying day by day. So we are in confusion. We are in confusion. And our country of origin, war is still there. War is still there. And the organization where we used to go, where we used to go and tell them our history, sometimes the services they deliver, it's not enough. They need also support. So what should be done up to now? Thank you.
Thank you, Mogi, for raising these very difficult questions with us. I will open the floor to the speakers. Any of them would like to respond? Please go ahead.
Priya, may I?
Yes, I see you, Jaya. Please go ahead.
Rose, thank you so much for raising this critical question. And I believe that the confusion that you are talking about, it actually lies with all the survivors. All the survivors, around the world are thinking the same, not only you. And we, working as an activist and supporting survivors, we also sometimes, go through this confusion. So my idea is, working together on this. The more we make it collective, the more our security becomes collective as well. And our fight is not only with the state, but our fight is actually within our homes, particularly in context of Nepal as well. And in your context as well, the situation is similar. So the more we get organized and the more we have our allies with us, then this fight will become a bit easier. So this is also one work that we have done together, asking the people who call themselves expert to do the thing in a right way, not harming the survivor. So we are going one step ahead, and we will certainly reach there where survivors don't have to feel shame and don't need to live in this confusion. Thank you, Rose, for bringing this important question into this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaya. Thank you, Rose. I'm turning to the next question questioner in the sequence, and that is Suhaila. Could I ask that Suhaila is unmuted? Please ask your question.
Thank you very much to all the organizers, and thanks to all the survivors who shared their powerful stories. We really appreciate that and hear it. I work on emergency response as a clinical management of rape and mental health and psychosocial support specialist. So my question is going to be around emergency response. The question is, are there any specific measures that the Murad Code project is using to engage humanitarian aid workers in terms of advocating for what the project brings on board? And or are there any collaborations that they're doing with the existing humanitarian structures? Because we do know that we have during emergencies activated structures like the protection clusters or the health cluster that all contribute to providing care and services to survivors. So I'm really curious to know if there is any collaboration or advocacy of the Murad Code with these existing structures. Over.
Thank you, Suhaila. The floor is open to the speakers to respond.
I can maybe answer that question. So hi, thank you so much for raising that point. And we do not in a structured project, but what we do is when we receive requests, and if you would be interested to get what we call it help desk, but it's basically an hour or two that we devote to an organization or a group of organization where we present the Murad Code, but also its practical applications. So basically, when humanitarian organizations reach out to us and say, can you help us improve our methods, our policies, and explain to us where exactly they would like to see improvements, then we prepare a session with them, and then we hold 1 hour, 1 hour and a half discussion where we present possible solutions, possible pathways. And I can see in your title that you also, and when you presented yourself, you're a psychologist, or at least an MHPSS worker, which is an extremely important aspect of our work as well. And we're about to publish also a note about how to improve the mental health and make sure that documenters do not interview survivors if they don't have such a support available. So if you'd like to reach out to us after this call, we'd be happy to try to create something together. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. Thank you, Suhaila. I'm aware that we are running over time. I see that there are 2 more questions to be asked, and we have 1 question online as well. So I'm going to go ahead and raise the question, or allow the person labeled administrator to ask their question. If you could please unmute yourself and kindly introduce yourself, your name, and your organization. If you could be unmuted. Yes, please go ahead.
شكرا جزيلا. معكم فيرونيكا سايما from South Sudan. Represent South Sudan Widow and Orphan charitable organization. So كثيرا للجهات المؤسسة لمنصة مراد للضحايا واللاجئين.
I am sorry to say, but we are having difficulty following your question. It's very unclear. Would it be possible to ask the question in the chat? Because the connection is very unclear, and unfortunately we can't hear you well. So I'll ask you to ask the question in the chat function in writing if possible, and we'll take it from there. My apologies about that. I'm now going to turn to another question, which is in the chat, and it says, this is Nuella from South Sudan, working with FIDA South Sudan. And the question is, what's the best assurance you can give to survivors who have given their stories in hope of getting a change in their lives, especially for a country like South Sudan, where political will is not available? So I'll open the question to the speakers. Please go ahead.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yes, of course. The question is, what's the best assurance you can give to survivors who have given their stories in hope of getting a change in their lives? And this is in the context of South Sudan. And Nuella says, especially for a country like South Sudan, where political will is not available to bring about that sort of change that survivors would want.
I can start
Please go
answering
ahead.
the question. I think, I mean, one, you need to know what your organization, the entity that you're working for, can actually do. And you can only deliver what you actually can. We have to know. We cannot make promises that we can't deliver on. If we know that we cannot change your circumstance, we have to be very transparent and very honest about that beforehand. And then you can choose whether you want to speak or not. The main thing is we just have to be very, very, very honest and very transparent. And if we cannot make an assurance, we can't make that assurance to you. And if there is something that our organization is able to do, well, then we have that conversation. But once again, managing what is truly possible. Yeah, it's a very difficult question, and I think many of the survivors and also documenters who have worked in other areas have recognized this takes a time, persistence, advocacy. Once again, the collective buy-in and pressure in all different levels. So starting at the small micro place, it's coming from, the documenter, we only can assure what we are capable of assuring, however small that is.
Thank you very much, Erin, for that answer. We are really cutting it fine in terms of time. I need to have a hard stop at 12:30. I see that Tatiana, you have your hand is not up anymore. So I will turn to Anjana. If you could please ask your question briefly, that would be much appreciated. Tatiana, did you want to say something?
Oui, je voulais rajouter sur la question de ma consoeur de Soudan du Sud.
Okay, that's great. I will just ask Anjana to hold on a minute, Anjana, while we turn to Tatiana. Thank you so much. Please continue, Tatiana.
Oui, merci. En fait, je voulais dire à ma consoeur du Soudan du Sud que le fait de témoigner ne signifie pas qu'on peut recevoir quelque chose ou un avantage derrière. C'est une expérience que moi j'ai en tant que survivante. Le fait d'avoir parlé m'a plutôt aidé à me soulager et à me battre contre les démons qui étaient mon traumatisme et tout ce que j'avais comme difficulté à ne rien faire, en fait. Et avec le temps, le fait que je puis briser mon silence, le fait que j'ai accepté la condition, j'ai accepté de vivre avec ma douleur, je continue de me battre. Je pense que c'est important que quand on fait des interviews et qu'on veut donner son expérience, qu'on ne fasse pas beaucoup d'attentes, qu'on n'attende rien en retour. Bien sûr que ça peut arriver qu'on ait des avantages à un moment donné, mais ce n'est pas vraiment que c'est automatique. À toute interview, on peut arriver à avoir des avantages.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. Thank you for your answer. Can I turn to Anjana, please? And if I could ask you to keep it brief, Anjana, thank you.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Anjana Sakya from Nepal, from Human Rights. Actually, from the very beginning of the conflict, we started to realize there's a lot of sexual violence against women. But we didn't focus on sexual violence against men because we didn't get that information. And I think that's this sexual violence against men, but they don't find it. I mean, with women also, it was very difficult to talk, but how can we also talk with men raise this issue? Because I think it's very important, because I think sexual violence is something that really can traumatize throughout, whether it's men or women. I think it can really traumatize and have a long-term impact. So how can we also work with men and make them comfortable to talk? Because one of the things I found out is that even with unsafe migration and human trafficking, men don't like to talk about sexual violence. And I think this is something during the armed conflict and in current situation, I think it's more stigmatizing or more difficult for men to talk about it. So I think, how can we make it a supportive, conducive environment for them to talk?
Thank you, Anjana, for this question. I will ask the speakers to keep their answers brief. So please go ahead. Mariam?
I think it's rather a question for Alexander. if you feel, if you want to answer.
Так. Будь ласка, повторіть питання.
I find, there is a lot of sexual violence against women during the especially during the armed conflict, and that we found some of the cases and started to raise it. But men, we in my organization there is about 5,000 cases of human rights violation of men, but they never talked about sexual violence. And I felt that now, thinking about it, it's very difficult for men to talk about sexual violence. They talked about all other violence, major human rights violations, but it's hard for men to talk about sexual violence. So how can we should also focus on sexual violence against men. So how can we, create a positive environment for men to talk about it?
To start with, I will add to my previous reply. According to statistics, we have 10 times more civilian prisoners, men than women. And as we can see from communicating with our colleagues and from our own experience, Russian occupants, they use CRSV in up to 80% of cases. So almost to every person, they use it. And I will repeat myself, they use it as a psychological weapon. They found a way to break a man through sexualized torture. That's first. Second, the answer to the question, how do you create a space, the environment? I believe that knowledge is the best. Awareness. I already said that in the very beginning, when we were only starting to work with police, with prosecutor office, we didn't pay much attention to that, to CRSV, because we did not understand that ourselves. Investigators also didn't know what questions to ask us. And in the materials of those criminal proceedings, it's not mentioned. But later, when we got acquainted with Murad Code, when we understood that this is really a system and we must speak about it if we want to break the system. Perpetrators who use it should be taken accountable. And when we are talking to people with men who were released from captivity now, we start share with them information. We start talking the same language with them. Of course, every man is like, oh, I also had it. I was also electrocuted to my genitals. But that man had never thought that it is a separate issue, that it is CRSV. And there are so many such cases, and you understand? So you need to create a space, environment where you have to teach every person. And as I already said, this tool which we developed, it will be really useful. It will come in handy when you make every person who was released from captivity with this tool. When they receive this information, former prisoners will be able to reconsider what they were going through in captivity, and it will be easier to talk to this person. It will be easier to tell them that what happened to them, that is something you don't need to hide. You need to speak out to prevent such cases in the future and to take perpetrators accountable, So that's why we created particularly men's organization.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for that really full response to Anjana's question. And I am now closing the Q&A portion of this session. One thing I would add is on the issue of investigating sexual violence against men and boys. IICI does have a resource on this, and the website of IICI has been shared in the chat, and you would be able to locate this resource on the IICI website, a guidance, a note on investigating sexual violence against men and boys. A huge thank you to all our speakers, particularly to the survivor experts for sharing their insight with us today. Also to all participants for the very rich Q&A session that followed. A special thanks also to all the survivors who contributed to the Murad Code project to develop these various resources. Please do take these resources forward in your work, share them in your network, and keep an eye on the Murad Code project website over the next couple of months as more tools are published. Thank you for your time. I now close this session.